Hello, and welcome to episode 19 of Privacy Laws, where I, Donata Strong-Skilbridge, speak with amazing privacy professionals, and we have some laughs along the way as well. Today, I'll be speaking with privacy attorney Elliot Golding about the overlap between financial and state privacy laws. Elliot is a certified information privacy professional and a partner at McDermott, Will, and Emery. Elliot provides business-oriented privacy and cybersecurity advice to global companies spanning virtually every sector of the economy, with a particular focus in the technology, healthcare, life sciences, retail, e-commerce, automotive, and financial sectors. He routinely counsels clients on the latest cutting-edge issues such as online advertising and tracking technologies, digital health tools, data monetization strategies, and artificial intelligence. So, Elliot, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So what made you interested in working in privacy?
Well, I had come out of law school back in 2009, and that was like a wonderful time to enter the legal market. And as I was sort of looking around, I realized I probably had to do something that other people weren't doing to be in a good spot, particularly at a law firm. And HIPAA had been amended in 2009, and no one was really doing that. And so I just kind of threw myself at that, and I kind of liked it. And then sort of right place, right time. I ended up getting seconded to a large health plan and, you know, just basically said yes to anything remotely related to data. And it kind of grew and grew and grew. And now it's kind of the cool thing to do. But back then it didn't really exist as a practice. So kind of a little bit of lucky, a little bit of just hard work.
Yeah, I think it was the same for all of us, if not most of us, right? We just kind of fell into it, loved it, and then kept going.
I mean, I don't know anyone who's been doing it a long time who didn't fall into it at some point. Like no one went to law school to be a privacy lawyer back then.
Right. So in your practice, you do work with privacy, but you're also working with cybersecurity as well. Can you tell us a bit more about how these fields intersect in your work with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think of them as flip sides of the same coin, right? You can't really have privacy without security, and you can't really, but to be honest, over the years, I've shifted a bit, right? At the beginning, I did a lot of breaches, a lot of cyber, because that's kind of what there was back then. More recently, I tend to do more privacy, but kind of, it's really just data. I mean, the distinction between privacy and cybersecurity, I don't think really matters as much as, just protecting data. And that could be privacy, it could be security. People call it different things. It doesn't really matter. It's sort of, how do you leverage data to support a business, right? And that includes keeping it confidential, keeping it available, and making sure it doesn't get corrupted, right? Confidentiality, integrity, availability. So confidential is kind of the privacy one, but they're all sort of privacy and they're all sort of cybersecurity. And most of these laws have both privacy and cybersecurity components. So yes, they are a big difference between them. But at the end of the day, when I'm advising a company, I don't really think of it in terms of like two different buckets entirely, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they definitely overlap. Probably a little bit unfortunate that they called it the CIA triad.
Right. Yeah, totally.
In terms of, with privacy and cybersecurity, there's a lot of stuff to stay up to date with, right? There's a lot of things always happening, new laws, rules, regulations, enforcement actions, fines. What are your favorite resources to stay up to date with all of this?
I mean, I read the usual trade press that everyone looks at. But to be honest, my main tool is having an amazing, big team of people here at the firm at McDermott. And what I found is between one of us, we pretty much catch everything. I mean, I'd say if I really, I can't think of a single situation where you kind of just miss something in a long time. And that's kind of what our clients are looking for us to do, right? To be the ones that stay up to date on this stuff. And you're right. Privacy is one of those fields where it's constantly changing, constantly evolving, unlike a lot of the other more classic legal fields people go into. But at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of trade press, I sign up for most of the major regulator distribution lists. And between those, I feel like that and having a great team, that's how we catch everything.
Yeah, that's great. I've made the mistake of signing up to some general attorney general lists, and I end up getting like so much stuff that's not
Spammed.
related to
Yeah, I
privacy.
know. It's really hard to keep up. So you have to like cut through the noise. So
Yep.
I always appreciate publications that kind of give me a few headlines and don't just pick up every single little thing.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things we do together at the e-privacy committee is
Right.
help people stay up to date with all this stuff because there can be so much going on at any given time.
I appreciate the we, but it's all you, Donata.
Well, now we have law students helping us too, so that makes things a lot easier.
That does make it easier for sure.
All right, so let's get into it. So today we're talking about harmonizing financial and state privacy laws. We hear about this a lot. State privacy law patchwork. It's becoming more difficult to manage. We're talking about organizations that need to comply with federal privacy laws and state laws. Can be a monumental challenge that requires a lot of manpower and leads to a lot of costs. So, why do we care about this?
Well, aside from the law is the law and all that, but there really is quite active enforcement. I'd say more on the state, like the general state privacy law side, than like GLBA, right, under with the FTC or the
Mhm.
CFPB. But the other part is the states that enforce other laws, like New York Department of Financial Services, the SEC. They're all really turning it up a lot on both privacy and cybersecurity, right? The classic, there was a breach and then you get investigated. But in many cases, the enforcement can be created just by like reviewing someone's website, right? The latest bastion of privacy disputes and litigation enforcement is really over cookies, and that's just you just look at someone's website, you can tell immediately if you know what you're looking for, right? Same thing with the litigation. In terms of again, cookies is just a big one for financial institutions. Also, is under the California Invasion of Privacy Act, and there's like several flavors of that. One of which is something that financial institutions do a lot, which is voice printing, and so creative plaintiffs are using that to bring these suits. And I guess the point is, it's really active enforcement. It's really active litigation, and if you ignore it, you're going to spend a lot more on the back end than you would on the front end, just trying to comply.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you mention, cookies and all that other stuff. I think, it's so easy to see that you could just run scripts on websites and see who has analytics or ads, but doesn't obtain consent for that.
Yeah, I mean, I just use Chrome developer tools, to be honest, and learn to
Mhm.
look at those tools to figure it out. I mean, there aren't really many laws that actually require opt-in consent in the U.S., but the plaintiffs' attorneys are arguing that the California Invasion of Privacy Act requires that. No court's decided it yet, but um, it's going on and on. Now there's like several dozen plaintiffs' attorneys bringing these suits routinely, and again, most of them are looking for settlements, but they're prevailing on motion to dismiss. So it's sort of going to come up sooner or later for most companies. Same thing with the California AG. Tons of enforcement. If you look at their published examples involving financial institutions.
Yeah. When you were, in law school becoming a lawyer, did you ever think you'd be using Chrome developer tools?
Never. I like if you'd asked me even probably 2 years ago, would cookies be, probably half of what I do right now, I would
Yeah.
have said you were crazy. And again, I don't think it's the most important privacy issue, but you gotta focus on the things that are impacting clients, and that's what it is. So I've taken a lot of time to learn from a very technical level how these work and how to do a cookie
Mhm.
audit and how to configure all the consent management tools. And you sort of go where your clients need you to, right?
Yep, absolutely. So what are some of these laws that we want to seek to harmonize both from a state privacy level and federal financial laws?
Yeah, I mean, financial companies probably have it the hardest of any sector other than health, because there's four completely different buckets of laws that they're going to have to deal with, right? So first, we already mentioned there's those general privacy laws that started with California, the CCPA, and now there's 20 of them, and or that are either enacted or soon to be enacted. And although many of them have exemptions for GLBA covered entities or the equivalent under state law. Some of them don't, right? Like California, the CCPA only has a data level exemption. So it only exempts data subject to the GLBA or the California Financial Information Privacy Act or CalFIPA. Right. Same thing with Oregon. There's a handful of other states that don't just exempt entities altogether. And, we have a comprehensive map on our site. Maybe you could put that up when you release the data, but
Mhm.
it's hard to keep up. And beyond the state, at the federal level, the FTC still has unfair, deceptive Section 5 authority over financial institutions, even if they don't have jurisdiction over the privacy aspects of the GLBA anymore for most companies. And of course, there's all the state data breach notification laws. So bucket one, all these general privacy laws. The second bucket are the financial privacy laws, right? So there's the GLBA at the federal level, which was implemented in states for the most part, with sort of mini GLBA laws, particularly in the insurance sector, and those get enforced by the FTC and the CFPB. And then there's the FCRA, Fair Credit Reporting Act. A lot of states have almost like three different versions of the privacy laws. There's like particularly for insurance, there was like the older Insurance Information Privacy Protection Acts, and then the ones that they enacted after GLBA, and then a more recent version of them. And there's a whole bucket there that don't really line up all the time across states. Then the third bucket is cyber laws and standards, right? So, there's the forthcoming CCPA cyber regs and the New York Shield Act, and then all the state financial cybersecurity laws like New York DFS cybersecurity regs. The insurance has the same types of things. There's PCI, there's the FTC safeguards rules, so cyber laws. And then the fourth bucket is activity specific laws, right? Laws that apply to marketing, like CAN, spam, and TCPA, or laws that apply to the use of artificial intelligence in California, in Utah, and Colorado, and the wiretapping laws that we alluded to earlier based on, the use of cookies and other things. So there's a lot of them, and they all don't line up nicely, and you have to harmonize them all. So it's really tough for financial institutions.
I really like the idea of harmonizing things, and that's something that I do almost every day at my job is trying to make compliance easier by seeing what the overlaps and what the differences are so we can save time,
Absolutely.
and save money. It's definitely something that I think every attorney should be engaging in because it's going to save them time, it's going to save their clients money, it's going to save effort, it's just going to make everything easier. So speaking of harmonization, what are some of the main differences and similarities between these laws?
Yeah, well, so the applicability differs across them all, which makes it so tough, but they all have similar sets of rules with different details, right? They all have some sort of notice requirement, right, where you disclose your data practices. They all have rules around what are the permissible uses and disclosures of data, right? And that's where a lot of them overlap, particularly the financial ones. They all have special rules for consent in some situations, and whether that's opt in or opt out, right? GLBA has opt out of sharing with non affiliates. Other states like California under CalFIPA have an opt in requirement, so it actually becomes a bit more stringent than the CCPA in some ways. Some of them have consumer rights, like GLBA doesn't, CalFIPA doesn't, some of the other ones do. A lot of them have contracting requirements. So there's a lot of overlap between them. It's the details that matter, and if it's opt in or opt out, or what's the content of a notice, or how often you have to deliver the notice. So, you can bring it all together in that sense, but then you really do need to pay attention to the details.
I like to think of it similar as, let's say you were in high school and you were writing a paper and so is your friend and you copy their paper, but you make it just different
Yeah,
enough
right.
the teacher doesn't notice.
That's
Uh,
right. That's right. It's a good
I
way to
think
think about it. Like California, when they started with the CCPA, it was like all over the place, and then Virginia came out with a version that had some support from industry, and that's sort of become the model. I
yeah.
think same thing with the GLBA and the NAIC putting out model laws that states tend to largely adopt, and then they make their own. It's like cooking, like you make your own changes to it to make it yours. So yeah,
Yes.
it's totally right. That's funny.
It's funny. I've even seen bills that are proposed that are like an exact copy of an existing law, except they forgot to input the number. So, like for the law to apply, you have to collect X amount of personal information from people, and they forgot to input the number into the X.
Really?
Yes, and I'm like, how did this make it through enough to be considered? Like, didn't you guys do any
That's
proofreading?
funny.
Or, response to consumer requests. One state will have 30 days and the other state has to have 45 so that it's different. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah. They just got to
And
be
then,
difficult. California always
yeah,
has to be difficult.
yeah, and that's why we all just are constantly losing our minds on trying to work this out.
Right. Totally.
But to harmonize these laws, you want to create an action plan. So, what are some elements of your compliance program that you'd want to take a look at?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm thinking about it, there's so many rules, and the question I get is just like, tell me what to do, bring it all together for me. And so when I'm either looking at building a program or evaluating one and doing an assessment or just improving and strengthening over time, I kind of break it down into 7 major buckets, right? And at the beginning of the project, the first bucket is doing some information gathering and scoping and harmonization. And, that can be a big range of things. Maybe I'll just walk through all 7 first, and then we can talk about what each of
Mhm.
them mean. But the second bucket then would be you need some sort of data inventory or mapping. I'm not like a big fan of doing a comprehensive data map because as soon as you're done with it, it's out of date. But
Yeah.
getting like some sense of where the data is, it's not possible to comply with all the requirements without some amount of mapping or inventorying data and keeping that updated. The third bucket is your external privacy policies, which are a requirement across all the laws. Fourth is data subject rights procedures. Fifth is contracting. Sixth is internal governance, documentation, training, privacy impact assessments, policies, procedures, all that. And the seventh is cybersecurity and breach readiness. You know, each of those could be an hour on its own, but that's the way I sort of break it down, and then I try to do a comparison across and figure out what we're going to do. But that first scoping step is really probably the most important.
Mhm. Yeah, so I really like how you said that before. Have you said that figuring out that which privacy laws apply to you? You start there first because you can't know the rest of the requirements unless you figure out which laws apply to you. And I've been jamming that down everybody's throats for years now. So, can you talk about the initial requirement of gathering information and scoping?
Yeah, I mean, I, the way I do it is I do what I call like mini discovery. Is I start by like somewhere between 2 and 4 interviews, and I'm trying to gather key facts about data flows, like what data elements do you collect, from where, how do you use it, how do you disclose it, all that. But also more importantly, like the context of it, right? Are you getting data in order to sell insurance? Are you getting data? Are you a regulated financial institution or not? Or maybe some functions are, some functions aren't. And trying to figure that out initially. And it might sound like it's obvious, but it's not, right? Um, a lot of companies are kind of right at that edge, and what is considered, financial in nature for purpose of the GLBA. It's a lot of edge cases, particularly with fintech
Mhm.
going on. So trying to gather the data and figure out what to do, and then more importantly, making kind of scoping decisions, right? Like, are you going to try to figure out the exact nuance, or are you just going to do highest common denominator, right? So between CCPA and GLBA and all the other ones, but starting with what are we working with here, and then figuring out like what does the company already have, right? Why reinvent the wheel if something's working? And sometimes it's easier, faster to just replace something. Sometimes it's not. But starting with a sort of mini assessment of what are we really working with here. So that's
Yeah.
that's kind of like the key first step. And I like to think of it as, well, 100% compliance is impossible. Just put that out of your head. It's not going to happen. So part of that information gathering is also defining what are we going to consider good, right? 70, 80%, you're probably doing better than most companies.
Mhm. Yeah. We talked about this before. regarding privacy policies, one of the things that we've seen a lot in the past is that a lot of external facing privacy policies have, disclosures for each specific privacy law, or maybe they even have specific privacy policies for each privacy law. Like, here's your California privacy policy, here's your Montana privacy policy. Do you see this as something that's unsustainable with the
Yeah.
system that we're currently in?
Yeah, I think it's totally unsustainable. So when we started having the state laws passed, there was interest in doing, okay, here's a California notice and here's a Colorado
Mhm.
notice and Virginia notice. And I just think that it's not sustainable. Now, the counterpoint to that is we are seeing some states and some regulators harp on companies that don't make it clear which rights apply to which people, right? Particularly if you combine several different notices, like a financial notice and a CCPA notice in the same place. We've seen Oregon start sending enforcement letters over that sort of thing, saying it's not clear. I personally think that having 25 notices in one place is way less clear, right? And I just try to make the notice really transparent about what applies in what situations in a really concise, consumer-friendly way. I like to think you can always tell if someone's new to privacy based on how long they write a privacy notice, right? And if it's like 30 pages long, they haven't been doing it that long. I like to keep mine super
Yeah.
short and to the point. And yeah, so to answer your question, yeah, I think it is unsustainable.
I think also for consumers, it's really frustrating as well. You start reading the privacy policy and, okay, here's the data that they're collecting about me. And then you scroll down and there's a California notice and it has 10 more data sets in there. And it's like, well, what are you collecting from me? Why is it different for people from California than somebody who's from Illinois viewing it? And then, you get intimidated by having to read 30,000 pages of the same information restated over and over again.
Yeah, right. And having that many leads companies to just sort of adopt almost templates, and then you get weird things like a flashlight app disclosing the category of sensitive personal information for you
Yeah.
know reproductive health or something because they just copied a template, and it ends up, the complexity ends up making it less transparent many
Yeah.
times. So I often just, we have to combine the laws, and that means sometimes we're going to have to take some risk and not comply with every last single requirement in every last state because it's just not feasible.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than your company's name ending up in the legislative notes for why privacy law was passed.
Yes,
I think there was one back in the day where there was a calculator app that was collecting geolocation information for some reason.
that sounds about right.
And I believe that there was a privacy law, I think it was CalOPA, that it was in the legislative notes saying, companies such as flashlight apps collecting way too much consumer data is why we need to create these laws. And I was like, oh,
Yeah, yeah,
that's never good. You never want to be that company.
right, exactly.
What about consumer rights requests? How does the harmonization work there?
Yeah, well, there you need to sort of start off with, well, what are the rights and all that. So, whether it's a right to know or access or correct or delete or opt in or opt out or whatever, yeah, you need the substantive back end at some point to fulfill the right. But I sort of think about it as, what's your process going to be, and creating a harmonized process. So, the first step is like intake. How are you going to get a request, right? How are you going to verify identity, right? To make sure you have the right person. What communications are you going to send out? And then, obviously the substantive response there. But to be honest, I have a lot of clients who years ago started off with, well, we're only going to give people the exact rights that apply in the exact state that they're in, under the
Mhm.
exact law that they're in. And there's a cost of complexity there. And a lot of folks over time just said, all right, well, maybe we'll do a one size fits all. I have plenty of other clients who started the other way, saying, no, we're just going to give everyone all the rights, and quickly realized that that was unsustainable too. So I think there's got to be like a happy medium there, and it's
Mhm.
always going to depend on resources and a client's particular risk tolerances. So, What I do is I create a template. I have a whole template set. It has a flow through it of how to handle each request, and then all the template responses. But the part that always has to be customized is, okay, and then how are you going to subsequently respond, right? Correcting seems easy enough. Delete also easy enough because it's usually an exception. But the right to know, the right to access to me seems really, really tough. Like actually going and grab a copy of every data point, and that's going to require a lot of thinking. Fortunately, it doesn't seem like too many people make those requests. It's mainly delete and it's mainly opt out.
Yeah, that's what we see too. And I think it really depends on the size of the company and how much data they're processing. Like for us, we're a much smaller company and we work in privacy, so we're going to offer the same rights to everyone. But somebody who has the data of millions of people across a lot of different databases might not want to do that just because of the cost and the time consuming aspect of all of this.
Right, exactly.
You touched on this previously a little bit, but when it comes to harmonizing these laws, what do we have to think about when it comes to tracking technologies and online advertising and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think of that as part of the data subject right bucket, right?
Mhm.
Because most laws will have either an opt in or an opt out of these sorts of things at this point. Um, maybe half at least of states. The thing to think about is whether it's a sale, right, or sharing or targeted advertising, whatever it is. A lot of companies didn't want to call these things a sale because it just sounded bad optically, but it's been defined and enforced so broadly that most cookie use, pixel use for targeted advertising is almost surely going to be a sale in at least some states like California, right? That
Mhm.
define sale broadly to include non-monetary consideration. But I think the more important point is how are you going to operationalize that, right? And if you're trying to think about compliance across CalFIPA and the CCPA and CIPA and the whole alphabet soup, I think it really comes down to a few key decisions of are you going to get opt in or opt out or nothing? Or are you going to geofence and do some states one, some states another? What's the language going to say? I see that being a big pitfall. People sort of overpromise, and you have a banner that says, "Please click accept to allow cookies," but the cookies have already fired. And all of a sudden,
Right.
something you were trying to do to give people choice has turned into an unfair, deceptive practice. And that's something that plaintiffs, attorneys, and regulators have been focusing on in particular. Because a lot of the tools are, they just don't work out of the box without configuring. Um, and then sort of, what language to use and how does it map to your other data subject rights requests. So if there's an opt out of sale, you're going to have to use a solution that basically drops a first party cookie to stop the cookie related selling sharing. Lots of companies sell in other ways too, right? Like creating custom audiences, taking your list of customers and uploading it to create custom audiences using social media. So you're going to have like an offline process. When I say offline, I mean non-cookie process.
Yeah.
So the cookies have really become a huge part of this, and it's mostly because it's the most litigation enforcement, way more than any other data subject, right?
Absolutely. Do you see, like, with this evolving legislation, do you see companies moving away from ads and tracking? Maybe kind of
No, no. I
no?
mean, Google had threatened to deprecate third-party cookies for like several years, and they eventually moved away from that. No one is just turning off the advertising right now. A small percentage, but it's growing, are moving to opt in, at least in California,
Mhm.
like, 20, 25%. But I still don't think that's market yet.
Yeah.
And I don't see people just turning off these technologies. What I do see is when we do these assessments, we find out that a site has a ton of cookies and trackers and no one has any idea why they were there or what they're
Yeah.
not being used. So yeah, in that sense, we turn them off because we're not using them anymore, but
Yeah.
not intentionally and broadly.
We've seen that too, where, somebody has analytics on the site. I haven't logged into that analytics platform in like 2 years and haven't seen of it. Maybe I don't need it.
Right, right.
So it does come up sometimes where companies are more cautious about this rather than just, oh, let's install everything and see what happens.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. What about, working with vendors? Are you seeing a lot of your clients updating vendor agreements to harmonize these laws?
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't already, right? One of the key things that needs to be done is update these contracts, and we do see that get enforced surprisingly for not having the right agreements in place to make someone a processor. And in California, you even need a controller to controller agreement that's sort of like GDPR in some state in some ways. Um, for the most part, if you already had a good contracting process that was done for the CCPA when the CPRA amended it, all the new states aren't really materially different. So, recontracting with all your vendors is a big, big hassle. And I
Mhm.
wouldn't suggest doing that. What I would suggest though is having a template agreement to have some consistency and then building a playbook around that. That's something we do with a lot of clients is, try to use your paper depending, you're probably not going to be able to negotiate with one of the big cloud providers, but for a lot of other vendors you can. And then having a set of pre-approved fallbacks if you need to negotiate to maximize consistency. And if you're sort of a vendor yourself, same thing. Even more so, you can't have a different contract for every one of your customers. But yeah, that's definitely a key part of it. And
Especially, oh,
no, go
go ahead.
ahead.
Especially for things like data breaches, if you have 12 hours to notify one client, 24 to notify another, 72 to notify the third one, that can get very confusing very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think most companies, it's just not possible to operationalize 12 hours for the most
Yeah.
part. But yeah, you end up with these like contracts of, are you really going to enforce that provision anyway? People
Mhm.
tend to get too wrapped up in it sometimes.
What about training internal staff? I mean, how complex do you want that to be?
Yeah, I mean, most employees don't need a complicated training. It drives me nuts when I see like an hour or two of privacy training for everybody because not everybody needs that much. Yes, you need to know the basics. You need to know not to do bad things, right? You need the don't do bad things training. Like don't give out data, don't share your password. I'd say it's more important on the cyber front, given that how much we're seeing breaches increase of from social engineering attacks or deep fakes and making people aware of those tactics. But the privacy training, if you look at the legal requirements, it's like in California, you need to train people who are either customer facing, who might get a request and they need to know what to do with it, or people that are actually handling data subject rights. Those probably need a lot more detail. I don't think every single
Mhm.
employee does a lot of detail. Like, 10 to 15 minutes should really be plenty because people are going to zone out anyway. You might as well make it worthwhile.
So I'm gonna put my head on the chopping block here. I got way too excited, and our privacy training is like 2 hours.
Yeah.
But in my
Is it
defense,
modular?
no, I go through it myself
Oh,
with
wow.
them. So it's not like a video we watch. But
Oh, well, no, so that's fine. That's fine. It's this is like self-learning modules, right?
well, in my defense, like 20% of our privacy training is just memes.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Well, so you can keep it interesting.
yeah, I try to keep it fun. And there's no shortage of privacy and security memes out there. So I personally think it's very entertaining, but
Yeah.
our employees probably don't think so, but that's
Yeah.
okay. So you gave us a lot of really, really good information here. What are some main takeaways that you want businesses and attorneys to know?
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is complicated. And if you're trying to build a program in particular, a lot more lead time is needed than you think, right? It might sound like, okay, we're going to get some notices and put it all together like that. And really, the operational aspects get really messy. And just, you need to think about how much time do you really need and what's feasible, what's achievable while people are doing other things for their day job. And there's a lot of options to implement. I mean, there really isn't a one size fits all. Now, I've plenty of clients that say, just give me a basic program. And for them, yeah, something's better than nothing. We can probably make it, pretty turnkey. But if you really want a program to work and to scale, particularly for a large organization, you really have to take the time to think about how you're going to implement. Um, Remember that most of the exemptions are construed pretty narrowly, right? So, for example, the CCPA itself has a section at the end, and granted, it's about insurance, but the same would apply to other exemptions that say general website visitor data is not exempt, right? It's not subject to CalFIPA or the insurance laws that have an exemption. So you need to think about really how broad or narrow is the exemption. Um, Part of that is the devil's really in the details. And the last thing I'll suggest is you have to test before launching. A lot of folks, again, bring it back to cookies again, will have this solution and they just launch it, and I go check it and it just doesn't work. So make sure that all your processes work, whether it's secret shopping or other sorts of testing. Um, Otherwise, you're going to kind of find yourself not only with compliance problems, but also unfair, deceptive representations and acts problems.
Absolutely. Yeah, testing is a pain, but it's definitely worthwhile. Absolutely. So, last question for you, Elliot. Where can businesses reach you if they want to retain you for your services?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, if you just Google me, you'll find me online. But email is probably the best way, which is eGolding at MWE. So EGOLDING at MWE.com. But yeah, just feel free to reach out there, LinkedIn, whatever. I'm a workaholic, so you'll probably get a message back from me pretty quickly.
Awesome. Good. Well, Elliot, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today about harmonizing these laws. And to our listeners, please make sure to subscribe to our podcast so that you don't miss our next episode.